Today we celebrate the feast day of All Saints. Saints are our brothers and sisters who, while they were here on earth, lived a life of holiness, striving really hard every day to follow God, to follow Jesus. Saints are now in heaven with God. But it doesn't mean that they're far away from us. The saints still care a lot about us and all the things that we go through here on earth. They are praying for us there. They are encouraging us to follow them in also following Jesus. We're connected to them, especially when we're here in the church when we have Mass. In the first reading that we had, St. John was given a vision of heaven while he was still here on earth. He got to get a glimpse of what it would be like to be in heaven. And so he says, I had a vision of a great multitude, more which no one could count, from every nation, race, people, and tongue. So when he sees his vision of heaven, he sees more people than he can count. All the different saints and angels around God. So when we're here at Mass, when we're here in the church, we're also connected to all those saints and angels who are praising and worshiping God. They're here with us, joining our voices when we sing God's praise. We might not be able to see them because they're invisible to us. So that's why in our church building, the way that we make them is to help us see all of these saints and angels. The paintings, the statues, the stained glass windows, all these things help us to see the saints that actually really are here with us. So just like John saw in his vision of heaven, we are surrounded by all these saints. So if we just look at a little bit of what do we see when we look around us? Well, first, at the top of all of our 12 columns, we have some symbols that represent the 12 apostles, those who founded our church that Jesus gave to. Then we have the four evangelists, St. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, right here in front, and then they're also in the four windows right up there. They're the ones who wrote the four Gospels that we read from, we listen to whenever we're here at Mass. Then in the middle of our high altar, we have our patron saint, St. Boniface. And on either side of him, we have St. Anthony and St. Francis. They're two Franciscan saints that help remind us to do good works for others. Behind me, maybe some of you over here can see, there's a window right there that has St. Margaret Mary Alacoque. She's the one who teaches us to pray to Jesus in the Sacred Heart, and also to honor Jesus in the Eucharist, which we do especially here every time we have adoration on First Thursday into First Friday. Then we have our side altars that have a bunch of saints on them. So over here we have an altar for Mary, Jesus' mother and our mother. She's surrounded by a bunch of saints for women and girls. So if we look at those saints, we have St. Anne, who has Mary right next to her as a child. St. Anne was Mary's mom and Jesus' grandma. St. Anne and Mary are also in the very first window here, along with St. Joachim, which would have been Jesus' grandpa. St. Elizabeth of Hungary is the one holding flowers with the crown. She was a princess and a wife and a mother, but also made time to make sure that she cared for the sick and the poor. St. Agnes is the one with the lamb. She was a very young girl. She was only 12 or 13 when she was martyred for wanting to dedicate her life and her purity to Jesus. Also in this window right here, we have another young girl saint, model for all the girls here, St. Bernadette, to whom Mary appeared to at Lourdes. Then on the other side, we have the altar to St. Joseph. He's the patron of the whole church and a good model for all men and boys. And he's surrounded by a bunch of boy saints as well. So we see two bishops on either side of him, St. Boniface and St. Patrick. Those two bishops went and traveled to tell others about the good news. St. Boniface went to Germany, and St. Patrick went to Ireland. We also have a statue of Jesus of the Sacred Heart. And then on the other side, we have another young boy saint he died when he was only age 23, when he was still a seminarian, St. Aloysius Gonzaga. He died after getting sick from the disease that the people that he was helping at the time had. We also have the first window that has Peter getting the keys from Jesus as he's made the first pope. And then our second window, we have another boy saint, St. Stanislas Kostka, another great example for us, who had a great love of Jesus in the Eucharist. On both of those altars, you might see these little gold jeweled cases. They're called reliquaries, and they hold a relic, a part of a saint's body or clothing, something from their actual life that we keep to remember and to honor them. And so we have a number of relics in those. We have St. Joseph and St. Boniface and those two. And then on the other two, we have St. Anne and St. Francis of Rome, St. Casimir and St. Francis of Paola. So that vision that John had of heaven, we see the same thing in our church, that we're surrounded by a multitude of saints. And he says in that first reading that they stood before the throne and before the Lamb. Well, we can see that in our church too. We have an image of a lamb right at the bottom of the high altar right there. Of course, the lamb is Jesus, the Lamb of God, that we say later in the Mass, the one that we come to Mass and we give praise to. Above the high altar, we have Jesus on a throne. Jesus seated on his throne. So all of our saints that we see in our church, they surround us and they surround Jesus' altar and Jesus' throne. John also saw all the angels around the throne. And so we have angels too. We have the angels around Jesus' throne up there, as well as some angels on either side of the tabernacle where Jesus is. John also said in that first reading that the saints washed their robes in the blood of the Lamb. So the saints were washed in baptism, and so were all of us. We were washed in baptism. We even have a window back there where St. Boniface is baptizing one of the German converts. So not only were we washed in baptism, we were also made holy by the blood of the Lamb, by Jesus' body and blood that we receive in the Eucharist when we're here on the altar. When we receive Holy Communion at Mass, Jesus comes to help us to also become saints, just like all the saints in heaven and the ones whose images we see. The sacraments like baptism and Eucharist help us to grow in holiness, just as the saints did. Our second reading says that we're God's children right now. But when we reach heaven, we will be even more like Jesus, even more like the saints. We will be saints. Changed by baptism and being fed by Jesus in Holy Communion, we can follow their example every day. That's what the Gospel says, the Beatitudes, that we are to be like the saints. We're poor in spirit, meek and merciful and peacemakers, clean of heart, hungering and thirsting for righteousness. If we follow their example and we ask for their prayers, then we have that great hope to rejoice and be glad with them and with each other, with all the saints, when our reward is great in heaven.